The 2018 Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities is holding their annual conference here in Victoria at the Victoria Conference Centre. Here is Mayor Lisa Helps.
It's great. I love going to AVICC. It's always a pleasure to go and visit other communities. And this year it's fun to be the host community. It's the first time we've ever hosted AVICC. And it's really great to be able to show off our city, especially as the host community. People come in a couple days early, they look around. We did some tours, a bike tour and a tech tour on Friday morning, and people are excited about the new bridge. I've heard that a lot. Love your bridge. So yeah, it's great, and it's just, the conference center is a wonderful facility. The food's been great. Our staff are really good. So yeah, it's an honor to host. I recognize AVICC has a choice, and I'm really happy that they've chosen Victoria.
The lack of affordable housing has been an issue in the province for quite some time. The delegates here discussed it at great length. Here is how some of them are dealing with it in their own municipalities.
We were able, not just for the city, but as a region, to establish a regional housing first program. So we've got $30 million from the region, $30 million from the province, and we're waiting for another $30 million from Ottawa. And if that comes through, that $90 million will build 2,000 units in our region over the next 5 years. And then anything that comes in addition to that from the province through all of these new programs will further enhance that. So we've taken a regional approach to housing for the first time ever, and we're making sure that the money that's coming in, so the $60/90 million, is spent to most address community needs. So we've spent about a couple of years doing a very detailed plan. We know how many units we need. We know that Aboriginal people, women fleeing violence, and seniors are a priority, and youth, sorry. Yeah, anyway, so we know what the priorities are, and we've got a plan in place to deliver the money. So I think the biggest challenge we're going to have right now in the region and probably across the province is there is so much money flowing for housing. It's going to be, we're all going to need to work together to actually get it out and get housing built. That's what's so exciting about the Regional Housing First program. For the first time in history, all regions are paying into and benefiting from this Regional Housing First program. And I don't like to say, I'm not a big kind of whatever blower of my own horn, but I feel like that is one concrete success that we've had in this term of office that, I feel like I had something to do with. And yes, it's all of us in it together, because, people sometimes grow up in Central Saanich and end up homeless on the streets of Victoria, or they live in the West Shore and they're young people and they end up on the streets of Langford. And so why shouldn't the money be spent regionally? But that means the money has to be gathered regionally.
We have a number of low-income housing projects starting. We have a number of low-income multiple family projects starting. We have a vulnerable home program that the government is offering, not only up to 40 units, but also with 24-hour assistance.
Oh, great.
So I don't know if that's for everybody or certain communities, but we have that before council. The issues is going to be, where do you locate these things without everybody lighting their hair on fire? But I'm very encouraged that we will find a great spot, and that the hard to house will have a place, and then have people to work with them so that they can keep it.
Right.
That's part of the the thing. And once you get a stable place that you can handle your life affairs and keep your stable unit, so they'll be like motel units, so they'll be studios, but fully contained with 24-hour public assisted support. And so I think the first thing is, how do I just keep this new little unit? And if I can just keep that, now next thing I'll get some education, or upgrade my education, or some skills somewhere, because maybe some of these folks are way more educated than us. You just don't know their life story. But once they learn to keep their home, then we can move them through, or to jobs and a great life, and so it'll be a privilege for them, and one they have to earn to keep, and there's support there. So I'm really excited about that.
A number of fronts we're working on, both with the private sector and with people in the nonprofit organizations. We're providing $30,000 a year towards the coalition efforts, the Comox Valley Coalition. Recently that money's gone into some projects where they've acquired condominiums to house people. They've also put money into the Transition Society. And that's part of the Regional Districts Initiative, where they put another sum of money, roughly $150,000. So about $180,000 a year out of local communities. We, of course, will work in partnership with BC Housing on other opportunities that come up. In the town right now, we have an application for an apartment building on Anderton Road of some 80 plus units. And so purpose-built rentals that haven't been built in the town for the last 2 decades, I would say. And so that's something that we're looking forward to deciding on very shortly, to approve that development and then move forward to provide a range of housing options. So.
And would those 80 units be deemed for lower and middle class income?
They're not, there's no specific, this will be market rentals. We believe that, through some of the other initiatives we have, like secondary suites, small lot subdivisions and others, that we can provide a diversity of housing stock. We've had proposals in the past for social housing through BC Housing, but at various points in time, BC Housing has either withdrawn support for those or the developers pulled back. So it's got to be at the right time, the right place. The City of Courtenay's had some proposals as well. We actually don't own any land, for example, that the town of Comox could provide that's not already being utilized for our municipal facilities. So we'll work with Habitat, for example, on the old fire hall site in Comox. They might be able to build a triplex there.
Well, some of the things that we've been doing is, as you're aware in the Comox Valley as well, that the vacancy rate for rental accommodation is at an all-time low. So what we have done in our Land Use and Development Department is expedite applications for rental housing, and we're really happy that we have over 300 units either approved or in construction right now for rental apartments. And what that does is increase the availability, which then helps not only bring down the market price, because it's a supply and demand point of view, but also increases availability. What we've also done is provided some density bonusing to really provide incentives for secondary suites or carriage houses to again increase the opportunity for people. Part of that has been also to work with the Campbell River Head Injury Support Group and BC Housing and the Macola Association that we will have 27 units in an affordable housing unit for the Campbell River Head Injury. We have a 48 unit from the Macola transitioning the travel lodge to an affordable housing function. And we're working with BC Housing and Heidi Hartman, who has been incredibly supportive as to how we're looking at not only the affordable housing aspect, but our most vulnerable in the downtown core, where we have a breakfast program, we have a lunch program, we have a dinner program, and then we have the various services to try to care for those folks, but there really isn't anywhere for them to go. And we have minimal emergency all-weather shelter accommodation, and we do have Sobering Assessment Center that are doing a fantastic job, but there's still a gap. So we're working with all of the agencies, with our RCMP, with the provincial government, well, Salvation Army are providing the lunch program. They're also providing the emergency all-weather shelter. So we've got a lot of really well-intentioned folks that will help the city and council deal with one of our strategic priorities, which is dealing with our most vulnerable.
Our council has been very concerned about housing in general. We've done a few things. We passed a bylaw to allow suites in a number of different zonings where it wasn't allowed before, and we just provided blanket zoning. So it's actually 2,800 parcels that now could have a suite that could not have it before. So that's significant. It will, it'll be an incremental thing. It'll happen over time. People will make decisions, and that we know that those suites will be affordable housing. The second thing that we're really excited about, we have 2 properties, one in downtown Chemainus, one in the greater Duncan area, that we have identified for affordable housing. We've rezoned the land, we've entered into a partnership with the Community Land Trust of BC, and they are pursuing some of that federal or provincial funding so they can actually construct. And they're on a relatively short timeline. So as soon as we hear that we have the funding, they will be able to go ahead we will have we'll have over 120 affordable units being constructed at that point. So we're really excited about that. And probably the third thing we're doing, in my other role as chair of the regional district for the Cowichan Valley, we are pursuing a function, which is a line item in the budget for affordable housing to the tune of about $750,000 a year. That would be a flow through to the Cowichan Housing Association and would provide them with enough money to maintain their administration, create a fund for looking for opportunities for affordable housing throughout the Cowichan Valley. And we took the first major step on that just last Wednesday when we passed a motion that we will be going to alternate approval process. Well, we have to make one more decision, but that we would be using the alternate approval process, and we're starting a public engagement prior to that. So it looks very positive to be moving forward at that level. Okay. And the really important thing about that is if we don't have a function at the regional district level, we can't apply for funding. You need to have that established. So we're really excited about that, and that could lead to a lot of good projects moving forward.
Following a keynote address by Premier John Horgan, one of the topics discussed is the legalization of cannabis. Here is what some of the delegates had to say about how they're going to handle that issue in their municipalities.
Thankfully, we've had our strategy in place for 2 years and we've been implementing it. So when dispensaries started opening, we tried to initially get the police to close them down. Didn't work, too much gray area, thrown out in court, waste of time. So we worked with the community to come up with a licensing regime that's been in place for 2 years. So we actually have licensed shops that already have zoning. And when the province comes with their regime, we'll adjust accordingly, but the province has actually been looking to the City of Victoria for advice and input because our regime actually seems to be working quite well.
What we did first was to pass a bylaw that said it is not allowed, that those retail sales are not allowed in any zone. Now, people might instinctively think, whoa, how can they prevent that from happening? But really, it's a strategic move so that when the legislation does come down, we can then decide how we're going to regulate where and how it will be allowed in our community. So it's really a strategic legal move. It's not an attempt to say it can't happen anywhere in North Cowichan.
Right, so you're waiting on the federal legislation as well as provincial.
Right. And we've been given the indications around BC liquor distribution type outlets and so on. We want to see that model, understand what it means before we determine what regulations we would apply. And we are allowed to apply regulations around distance from schools and so on. So, but that step can come later when we see what the federal government and the provincial government are doing.
And what about people that would be applying to actually have grow operations or research and development?
Yeah, that I believe will be licensed at the federal level. So it's not something, as far as I understand, that we would be involved with.
Would that come into play with zoning though?
And I'm sorry, and that's the one place you're right. Although, we initially said any commercial grow operations, commercial scale grow operations should occur on industrial land. Because we looked at the type of structures that there were going to be and the security level and the power requirements, and that it looked like industrial to us. We did not want it on agricultural land. But the province said, after the ALC ruled on having them within the ALR, said no, you will have to allow it within your agricultural land. And we changed our laws to reflect that because we are a creature of the province, and we were able to establish our own setbacks, and that we did, but we were not in a position to not allow it on agricultural land, which was our first instinct.
We have 2 applications right now for medical marijuana grow facilities, and that is for the medical marijuana facilities. We don't know whether those will actually come to fruition, but we have taken the position that any retail outlet, as is currently deemed by both the federal and provincial governments, is illegal. So we do not issue business licenses and do not accept that at this time. We get an awful lot of applications, particularly now with the change in legislation in Ontario, of people wanting to relocate. And our position has been pretty standard, that we are waiting for the federal government to make their final determination as to what the federal government rules and regulation and legislation is going to be. And then that will then default to the provincial government for them to again do the legislation and regulations. And then from there, the local jurisdictions will then determine what rules we actually can abide by and how we're going to make that fit for our communities. So I don't think anybody on our council is against the medical marijuana, and it has been proven medicinal purposes, but we just need a very strong regulations and legislation as to how the distribution of that is going to happen.
And what's the timeline that you're now looking at?
I think you would have to ask the Prime Minister and the Premier for that, because we don't know. Well, we don't have anything definitive at this point, because it was going to be June for the federal government, then it was going to be July 1st, and now we're hearing that the Senate may not do it until the end of August. So when the federal government then does their part, it will go over to Premier Horgan, and then the provincial government will need some time to be able to do it. I do know that the ministry is looking at policies as to now, so they're being very proactive. But as far as the time frame, we're the third leg of that 3-legged stool, and we'll just wait till it comes to us for decision making.
What we're doing is a bit of a 2-step approach. We're looking at an initial ban on retail sale of cannabis for recreational purposes. And once that's passed, then what we'll do is consult with the public on where and when they'd like to see possibility of retail stores. Similar to what we've done in the past for liquor stores. Kind of end up with a spot zone, making sure that the appropriate distances from schools, daycare centers, recreation facilities, parks, things like that. And we're not yet sure what the province will do in terms of its own stores. So we're waiting for that to happen. So that'll unfold over the next few weeks and months.
And federally, they are still waiting on a decision from the Senate, correct?
I think the Senate has passed some resolutions, and my understanding that will result in the implementation date being pushed off from July into September, maybe even October, but certainly towards September is what we're looking toward.
Now, in addition to the retail outlets, have you had anybody apply for a growing license?
We haven't had any approaches there. We have had one company come to us that is in the research and development side, and what they're doing is going to be putting in a research facility down by the traffic circle in Comox near the airport. That's 7 acres of land that they're going to utilize. They're based out of UBC, and they need more space, so they've come over to the Comox area, and we're going to support that. In fact, we've already passed their development permit for that, and that'll we'll probably see some construction of an initial phase of buildings and then subsequent phases over the next year or two.
And is that going to be at all greenhouse based, or
there'll be some greenhouse space, but there'll be also sort of like lab space. Okay. And this will create about 30 jobs within the community, and high-paying jobs. So we're quite positive about that, and there's a lot of work to be done in the cannabis field around research and development, and they have a very good reputation already. So we're pleased to welcome in the community and bring some of those jobs here.
We've already met with our legal team and with council, and they were illegal in the city of Powell River. So the ones operating have been busted a 3 times, and letters and all the follow-ups that go with that, but they just keep reappearing. The RCMP has decided, and the bylaws have decided, just kind of let it alone. Watching for minors. If we hear there's issues with minors and such, then we're all over it. But I guess in light of the fact that it's going to be legalized any time, those people will still, they'll find themselves in a problem in Powell River because we don't have a business license for marijuana use. So basically the whole city doesn't have any bylaws or jurisdiction at this time.
Will you be developing those?
So yes, so what's happening now is we're awaiting a report from staff as to all the legalities, all the issues, suggestions of where, how far from churches, schools, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then based on that, you know, we'll either do a spot zoning, I would think, or on a as per basis as people apply. I'm sure we'll talk about, you know, distance from, just like the liquor stores, how many we want in the community based on population. So yeah, we have it in hand.
Okay. Now that takes care of the retail side. What about people applying for licensing for growing ops?
Yeah, so we have one grower there, one
Medical marijuana?
medical marijuana licensed facility, Sante Veritas. They started with a $6 million investment. They've now raised an additional $27 million. I'm not saying it's all going into Powell River, but the vast, vast majority is, because they also have a head office in Toronto, and I believe a medical research team. So they'll be getting into all the creams and I guess edibles and oils and such.
So
over and
research
above.
and development as well as...
As well, yeah,
growing.
pharmaceutical, what I understand, as well as, you know, the growing. Phase 1 is almost completed and they're just waiting for their final walkthrough or their final license portion of their application. So they're at the end now, they're just waiting for licensing. So the first phase is built and they're just working now with Health Canada on the final report to get their license to start growing, and they're expecting that momentarily. They're also now before the city with their bringing us phase 2, 3, 4, I think, which is an additional up to 300 to 400,000 square feet, which they've targeted land.
Would that be greenhouse development?
Greenhouse
or?
development,
Okay.
yeah. So they've targeted land that's properly zoned, a portion owned by the city, and another portion owned by Catalyst, and they're in discussions with Catalyst for that. So yeah, they're well on their way, and they figure that if they get to their phase 4, maybe even 5, they will be employing upwards of 200 people. So a new tax base for us, which we, you know, need. So we're just waiting for a report. As soon as we have the report, we make some decisions, then we go to public consultation, chat it up with the community, and then get back, make some decisions. And they have not opened the portholes yet either, we are told, for applicants. So I imagine, you know, until that happens, we won't be getting too much pressure.
Fish farms continue to be an issue here in the province of British Columbia. Here is what some of the delegates had to say on that topic.
So the city really doesn't have a position, although we promoted land-based aquaculture for a number of years. We hit a bit of a brick wall. We got very close with a number of the companies out there that are pen fishing. But it got down to costs. They said the costs didn't make sense to them. We do know that the social license is going to eventually, I believe, in British Columbia, push people to land-based aquaculture. We had a great location for it. We had infrastructure for it. We promoted it hard, but you know, we got close, but no cigar. My feeling is that, you know, we don't have a lot of it. We have a lot of shellfish types in Oak River. Not a lot, but you know, we have a number there. South of Sultry Bay, I think there's some fish farms. But we do have one that's very successful in Lois Lake. I think it's West Coast Aquaculture, you know, Seafood Corporation, I believe it's West Coast. Started out by a local family and then got bought out by a larger corporation. They're a great employer in the community. They, you know, go from seed to where they produce the end product. They don't just sell the fish, they actually take it right to the end user. So they have a plant, process plant, sorry. So it's all encompassing, and it's a steelhead trout that are grown in Lois Lake. It has become a very popular fishing area. The anglers get in there and fish around that lake, do very well, I'm told. Personally, I understand that people have hang-ups about it, but I also, believe that I trust our environmental groups, whoever they are, to do the best work they can. And there's a lot of families that are employed in this area.
Well, and I would think that would be one of the biggest challenges for anybody on any mayor or any councillor on any of the coastal communities, is how do you balance the environmental impact of anything versus the employment and tax-based benefits. So
Right.
that's
a tough part of the job. There's no doubt about it. Many countries have fish farming. We're not the only province. And again, like I say, science-based technology and evidence, and you never know honestly who to believe. Each one has a different opinion, darn it. And so I don't know, I wouldn't be all for, I would like to see this. This is what I told the lady downstairs advocating against, is that if you have a pen license, then maybe you need to start investing in land base to keep your license, and start slowly transitioning to that social place that British Columbians can deal with. And so as part of.
So you talked about the fact that you got really close with a company developing land base. Do you think that at any point in the near future they will come back to the table and revisit based on the need? Like, there is a need worldwide for protein, and fish provides an amazing source of protein. So, would those barriers be able to be removed or at least lessened to get them into that?
The barriers are financial, they say. We had what we feel to be very affordable waterfront land with the right assets around it for infrastructure. They may come back. The land may not be there. Right? There's not a lot of waterfront land available for things other than condos, unfortunately. That's the way the world's going. I don't know how long this land will be available in Powell River. So, but if it is and we own it, I'm sure we would look at a tax base and jobs on land-based agriculture. I think we would.
Campbell River is the center for the aquaculture industry for the province of British Columbia and the west coast of Canada, with the three major aquaculture companies and also the BC Salmon Farmers Association. But also the BC Centre for Aquatic Health Sciences is based in Campbell River, which is doing all of the confirming the regulatory authorities as prescribed by the federal government. And with the ruling that this is a federal jurisdiction, it is somewhat frustrating to see resolutions that are not well prepared, that are misleading and not factual, being accepted and introduced into a form for people that really don't have the background that they really need on the industry. In regards to the chefs, really well intentions. Tojo is a really good friend of mine. Actually took a cooking class with him, and he was the guy that actually founded the California roll to introduce Japanese food cuisine to North American culture. But I can say that I have had sablefish that has been raised by Golden Eagle Hatchery in Agassiz and taken up to a fish farm in Port Alice, and then processed in Middle Point in Campbell River and is served at his restaurant. So I know that there are issues for and against on the aquaculture of open net farming, but the reality is that this is a federal jurisdiction under the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and every regulation that has been put in place, the industry has met. If we need to work collaboratively to increase the regulations to provide more certainty and more preservation of the environment, which I think everybody wants, then everybody's on board to do that. The other thing, though, is that whether you're in the industry or you're opposed to the industry, everybody has the common theme of the preservation of the wild stocks, the preservation of the environment is the most paramount thing. So it's how to work together to make that happen.
I like the precautionary principle, and if it could be factually shown that there was harm in the wild environment through fish farms, then I would support the move to on land. I know it can be done on land. We have actually a fish farm in North Cowichan that does very well. It's land-based and does very well. I mean, the chefs might prefer to serve non-fish farm salmon. I don't know. In the global, I know there's concern about how much fish you have to feed a fish to you know, if you have to put in more pollock or something from Chile to grow a lovely salmon, there are issues there, but I really don't know enough to give you great insight on that.
I think the fish farm debate has been going on for many years. There's a lot of strong opinions on it, let's say. The fact of the matter is that it employs a lot of people, the fish farming industry does. In the Vancouver Island area, at least 4,000 people directly, plus many indirect jobs. And I would say that we need to make sure we have the best evidence. There are organizations that have been working towards improving how fish farms run and how they deal with some of the environmental concerns. And we have our Shellfish Festival, which also involves the salmon farmers to a large extent. And many of the chefs that come to that also will work with that product. So it's a product that is providing protein to the world at large. And yes, of course, it has to be done in a more sensitive way. Moving to land-based systems is still a work in progress. There are a couple of companies that have been trying it. It's not yet commercially viable. And you know, and there's environmental impacts for that as well. So I think to implement an outright ban on it, I don't think is reflective of the initiatives and efforts taken by the industry and its proponents towards making it a more sustainable industry, much like any kind of farming operation would want to be.
One of the topics that is always on the table for discussion when coastal community leaders gather is BC ferries.
As far as ferries are concerned, and it's hard for me not to talk about them, it's great to see the seniors' days back. It's great to have the 15% rollback. We have, I believe, all our schedule runs back, which was huge on the Vancouver Island run, but I don't believe we have them all back on the Vancouver run, you know, lower coast of Vancouver. So we'll be looking into that. And then I've been talking with the president of BC Ferries about the huge disparity of Powell River, that as far as I can see in my research, we're the only community that pay both ways. So any other land-based locked community that has ferry dependency, you pay to come in and that's it. So if you come in with your motorhome or your trailer and your truck or what have you, your car, you pay and then you leave. Well, if you go to Seashell, Gibson's, Pender Harbor, you pay, you know, say $250 with your big motorhome or whatever it is, truck and trailer, you enjoy. Well, you don't go to Powell River because it'll cost you another $250 to get out. So you don't come to Powell River because it's $250 in, $250 out. But you can go to the lower coast, $250 in, nothing out. It's a huge disparity. And I've checked and I've got a table created that shows, you know, the higher cost. It's not a level playing field. Claire, you know, if you can help us with this issue, I'd appreciate it.
I think that the ferries issue is always going to be a difficult one. I actually heard Premier Horrigan talk about solving BC ferries as if you reached a point where you were done. I thought that was interesting, but I think you only are ever going to manage BC ferries, and the balance between fares and affordability and you know, and routes. I've been part of a number of ferry discussions on what can be done around that. It's complicated, it's difficult, it's challenging. I think there will always be a challenge there, and we just have to reasonably assert our interests in having viable ferry systems. And just give you one little point about something that I like to talk about when somebody brings up ferries. We have a ferry from Chemainus to Thetis and Penelakut Islands. The Penelakut, who used to live on mainland Vancouver Island, now live largely on Penelakut, and they need a ferry. They need the ferry for every daily need they have. Health services, food, you name it, to get to school. And it puts them at a huge financial disadvantage, especially since there's very little employment on Penelakut Island itself outside of the band administration. If I ever get a chance, I advocate that the federal government, I believe, should take responsibility for them not to have to pay ferry fares, because it's a really unfair situation that they're in.
One issue raised by some of the coastal community leaders is the lack of available wood fiber.
Fiber on the coast. So we have sawmills, the ones that have survived. We have pulp and paper mills, the ones that have survived. The industry has taken huge hits, we all know it. We've got this new issue of the anti-dumping that BC alone has been hit with on paper. We've got the softwood issue. When it comes to a sawmill and a pulp mill, they need each other like a team needs each other, a forward and a wing person or a defenseman, because one doesn't survive without the other, believe it or not. They're totally integrated. They use each other's products and wastes to survive. And so it's a huge issue. But on the coast, we need approximately 1 million cubic meters of pulpwood to keep our mills going. The AAC, the annual cut allowable, is approximately 2 million. I'm not a forester, I'm just a mayor that's done some homework and lobbying. So we have 2 million cubic meters available, but when the logging companies, the licensees log it, the value isn't there to take out the pulp logs, so they stay. Or they get exported. So actually Catalyst has been buying some of BC logs out of Alaska, I understand. Figure that one out. Yeah, you're shaking your head. I'm not going to say that's gospel, but I think it's true. And I've been told that by people in the industry. So somehow, and I got to say, Minister Donaldson put together a task committee. The mayors of these communities wrote letters and asked them to do so with industry. There is a task force, but there has to be some pretty tough changes, like a licensee must take out their cut. Pulp people, you got to pay some more. The government, you got to give up some more. Maybe you can give them some more of the TFL elsewhere, that they hold in their basket for keeping the market. They have their own basket that they log to keep the timber cost levels for government. So they're in the market, they know. So there's got to be some things that are not just studies or, same thing. If a local person wants to go get the pulp and chip it, they can't. They don't have access to that waste, so it just sits there and rots. Forest fire material, it's fuel. There's just a whole bunch of stuff, but we need action quickly. Powell River is down now for 3 weeks, starting next week, for no fiber. And this is just the beginning. And so we may lose mills over it. I think my mill could be lost over lack of fiber, never mind the anti-dumping issue, which is a whole other issue.
We have a Catalyst pulp and paper mill in Crofton. Fortunately, it hasn't been as dramatically affected as the mill in Port Alberni yet, but there is a fiber supply issue. So the pulp operation relies on fiber that comes from pulp logs. Unfortunately, the forestry companies have been generally leaving pulp logs on the ground and just bringing out the saw logs. And Catalyst has even had to go so far as to block the sale of saw logs so that they would have enough fiber to carry on. That's not a good situation for anybody. The forestry company doesn't get the same value out of that saw log that it could if it was selling it internationally. The pulp mill has to pay more, and it's more difficult getting the supply of fiber. And it's really, in my understanding, it's largely because what was once an integrated forest industry has been split up. Those large companies that owned logging operations, had tenure, had sawmills, and had pulp mills. It was integrated because each needs each other.
Can they not go back to that integration?
Well, it could in theory, but you have different companies that are with different owners, different shareholders. I would think that would be a great model, but in our current capitalist economy, I don't know that you can't necessarily force companies to reunite.
The chair of Strathcona Regional District has some very exciting news regarding an innovative project that will affect rural communities on Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands.
Through the regional district, we have a strategic priority which has been developed over the years through a lot of our rural and remote communities, because one of the issues they have, of course, for accessing any of the provincial programming is around connectivity. So through that, we were able to apply to the Connected Coast, which is through the federal department, for a grant, which is being, it's about a $54 million grant that is through the federal government, through ISP, through the Indian and Northern Affairs Canada, and then also through the provincial government to lay subsea fiber all around Vancouver Island so that those rural and remote communities have a high level of connectivity.
Awesome.
Yes.
Now, logistically, how are they going to lay that fiber?
It is a subsea fiber. So it's coming across from Vancouver, where it's going to connect into the Vancouver Open Access, come across, go around to create some redundancy around some of the islands so that if one spot stops, it continues, wraps around Vancouver Island and of course all of the Gulf Islands, whatnot. And then we are also in partnership with a company called City West, who is wholly owned by the City of Prince Rupert. And they are also going to continue that line from Vancouver Island and connect it all the way up to Prince Rupert so that all of those northern coastal communities have access as well.
Wow.
Yes.
Impressive.
Thank you.
Full of vision.
Yes.
It seems like a very visionary initiative.
It is visionary, but when we heard that the federal government was going to make it their mandate so that every Canadian had access to high-speed internet, that it fit really well into our strategic priorities. And knowing, of course, that all of the government programming is becoming more connectivity based, whether you're talking about emergency management BC, whether you're talking about telehealth, distance education, any sort of programming around any provincial delivery system. It becomes imperative. Otherwise, those communities not only have no ability to connect and enter into any sort of economic development opportunities, but they're actually farther and farther behind than the rest of us that have those access to those services. So,
Right.
yeah.
In the cities, we take for granted that we get 4 bars and sometimes 5 bars if we're really lucky. And if it doesn't come up within 5 seconds, we lose our minds.
Yes.
And so our accessibility to anything electronic is second nature for us. But I would see that not having solid, reliable internet service, even of the dial-up kind, is going to prevent any of those populations from accessing MSP, Revenue Canada, whatever, like all of the government stuff is now online and they're pulling back on their phone support.
Yes.
But they're adding to their chat support and their email support.
Yes.
So by doing this connectivity project, it's really removing all of those potential barriers for a very large population.
A large geographic population, but they're very clustered. So right now we see the bigger telecommunication companies not being able to develop those business plans to be able to facilitate going in and giving them what they need. which is why the federal government, the provincial government, and Indian and Northern Affairs Canada, because we are going to be doing a lot of communications with our First Nations partners around this, because there is a lot of communities throughout Vancouver Island and all the way up the coast that this is going to affect, that then allow them not only to tap into those services, but into the possibility of cell phone towers and whatnot. So we're hoping that the bigger telecommunications companies come to us as well, because we are being able to facilitate that with subsidized dollars, where they might then look at it and say, okay, well, we might be able to put a cell tower in there to provide those services. So it's not about competing with those big telecommunications companies, it's about partnering with them and recognizing that the federal government has said that this is a human right, that all of our services are coming into this sort of sphere, and we look at it as a new way of connecting. Where you used to drive to your aunt's house, you now don't drive to her house. You pick up your phone and you either call her, or you send her a text, or you do or FaceTime, or something like that. I've done a couple of interviews over the phone into CBC or others, and if I was in Zabalas or Tassus or Sayward for that matter, I couldn't have done it, because I wouldn't have been able to have the cell phone connectivity to phone in and even do the interview. So I think as urban people who lose their mind when they do not have the bars that require us to communicate across a room or across the street, we do take it for granted. And until you actually get out into those areas and realize how limiting it is, people don't understand the importance.
Edwin Grieve, you are known far and wide as a Comox Valley Regional District Director and past chair, and now you are president of the Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities. What are you going to try to accomplish in your 1 to 2 year term?
Well, as you know, it is not a governmental body. It's a society, like a professional association, that basically advocates for the membership. We've got lots of communities up and down the coast, all the way to Haida Gwaii and right down to Victoria and Regional District. So what we're going to try to do, I guess, whatever is emerging at the time. We've got a few irons in the fire. One of them is around a AVICC-wide social procurement hub that Victoria's taken over now. And the other one is ongoing, of course, is the Special Committee on Solid Waste. We're looking into synergies and economies of processing waste on a more multi-regional basis. And then whatever else, I guess, comes from the floor at convention. I'm thinking that basically what we do is, if there's issues that the membership want to lobby senior government, federal or provincial, then we bring forward their concerns and try to work through UBCM to arrange cabinet minister meetings and what have you to move those forward.
Okay. I heard some rumblings that around the number of resolutions that end up going from the AVICC to the UBCM, and that maybe it's a few too many and maybe the priorities need to be narrowed.
Yeah, I think that's, again, up to the membership. There's a certain amount of discretion that the executive takes in which ones it brings forward and which ones it does not. But 9 times out of 10, you're better to bring it forward and test it out on the floor and see what the will of the membership is, because otherwise you run the risk of looking like you're running it from the executive, which is not what this organization is about.
And how many members does the AVICC have?
Oh.
As president, you're supposed to know that.
I'm just newly elected. I have such a learning curve ahead. Well, you think about it. We've got, like I say, Haida Gwaii, the Central Coast. We've got Mount Waddington, Powell River Regional District, Sunshine Coast. We've got Strathcona, Comox Valley, Alberni-Clayoquot. We've got Nanaimo, Duncan, Capital. So we've got a fair slug there, and that includes, of course, most of the Gulf Islands as well. So except for Bowen Island, and I think they made some noises about joining AVICC, but they're actually part of the Metro, Vancouver.
Okay. So this is a question for you personally.
Oh.
Why keep working in public service?
Well, as you know, I do a lot of volunteer work, and I always have, for most of my life. And you can only take volunteer work so far, and you need to be in the government to actually direct policy. Not that you get what everybody gets what they want out of it. It ends up being a compromise. But you can only get so far. So I feel that I can be more effective as an elected representative, even though I haven't curtailed very much of my volunteer work. And it gets to a point where you wonder if you need an intervention or something. But no, I think it's important, to advocate from a position as an elected official in government, because you can actually, it may take a lifetime, but you can actually see your policies and your initiatives come to fruition.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to anybody under the age of 25 that's possibly considering a life of public service and volunteer opportunities?
Stay in school. Well, that's one of the issues we were talking about, is the fact that it's very, very difficult for some of the younger people to especially in local government, because the popular misconception is that we're making a fair amount of money, and we get pensions and dental and medical, and of course none of that stuff's true. That may be true for senior government, and certainly true for staff, but when you're an elected official, if that was your sole source of income, you'd qualify for extended medical benefits and top up, assistance. So you're making a good quarter to a third of what staff makes. And not to say that you're not putting in the hours, because it's come a long way in the past few years. The amount of reading you have to do, the amount of preparation, the amount of outside meetings you're expected to attend that you don't even get gas mileage for. So someone said to me, he said, I don't mind volunteering, but my truck's not going to volunteer. So can I get some gas money, please? No. So it's tough for younger people, but it's important that we don't disenfranchise them, because what we're seeing now with all these cotton tops out there is that we come from a different era. And to address the issues of today, we need the younger people. We need the fresh air coming in. And that's one of the things that I ran on for the presidency, was to open the doors, bring in new people. The difference between moving through the 4 table officer positions 2 years at a time, that's an 8-year commitment. And I think that most organizations, even if they're allowing the president to stand for 2 years, the culture is that they stand for 1. That way there's opportunity. It doesn't look like an old boys network out there. And I think that's the issue. We have to empower people to step up and give them opportunities.
On behalf of Shaw TV, thank you for joining us for the Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities Convention 2018.